So, just in case you live in New York or another big city, Troy is one of the ultimate reminders of the different lives that people are living. And this is the kind of thing that, among other things, drew me to the psychedelic community when I started becoming involved in it. And that in addition to, of course, the experiences, the knowledge and the reading and the ideas, you got to meet about the most fascinating people you could possibly imagine. We're going to do Q&A as a group with the other presenters we're about to hear from in a little bit, so you will get to ask Troy some questions. But it is now my continued honor and privilege to introduce you to Roberto Borrero.
Tegui, dituno kena datia ono, diri mukaro aguibana, cacique yukayeke guainiag, boriken taino daka, koai daka, koai daka, koai daka. Can anybody translate that for me? That's all right. Christopher Columbus didn't understand it 500 years ago, and we're still trying to figure things out ever since. But I just wanted to greet you in the Taino language, which is not English or Spanish or any other colonial language. We have our own language, and it's always proper, at least the way I was taught, to at least offer a greeting in the language so that you can understand. We set the tone that we're coming from communities with histories and backgrounds and all that comes along with it. So it's really a great honor to connect with all of you as sisters and brothers. I also said that I'm very happy to be here, and also identified the island where my lineage, both paternal and maternal, originate. So I'm very happy you heard a little bit about me in the introduction, the kind introduction from Kevin, and I really appreciate being a part of this next panel talking about allyship. If you recall from the introduction, I've had the real pleasure, I guess in a sense, I could say it's been a pleasure, although at sometimes it also is very frustrating to engage in international systems like the United Nations, where we speak about these issues and where we try to develop as peoples. And remember, when I say peoples, I'm specifically saying peoples with an S, because indigenous peoples are linked to what we call or what we know as the UN Charter, so which recognizes that all peoples have the right to self-determination, and we all should have dignity, and you know, check out the UN Charter and you can read the rest of it. But why I'm saying that is because our peoples, like our relative from the Comanche Nation, when you'll hear some of the other speakers coming up, you know, our peoples have, as I said before, histories. We have protocols, we have governance structures, we have a way of interacting with each other as communities and families, but also interacting with those around us, whether they are human relatives or, as you so beautifully seen in these slides that were shown before, with the other relatives that share our world with us. That's not only these in this form or these physical forms, but also in our tradition we acknowledge the spiritual forms, the spiritual life forms. We have words for them, and some are more honorific than others, depending on the situation that you're in, or even the community that you're in, whether you're initiated into certain protocols or whether you're not. So some things we can say, some things we can't. And as our relative understands, once you are initiated, it takes you into another realm, into another way of looking at things that maybe you didn't understand before. So myself, as a ceremonial practitioner, and being pushed into the United Nations system, I'm not a lawyer. I've hung out with a lot of lawyers over the years, so I understand a little bit about that world, and also the need for us as traditional-minded people, as ceremonial practitioners, to be working in allyship with lawyers, whether they are indigenous or non-indigenous, to help remind them of some of the things that they might not put into their mind when they go in a certain sense, when you're dealing with legal aspects or that. So we need to be there to talk and to make sure that what they're putting forward really resonates with the traditional communities. So I've been a part of negotiations process, multi-stakeholder negotiations, from the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to what happened in Paris in 2015, and more recently the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so it was very interesting for me to hear, for example, the Nagoya Protocol, which is linked to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is important for indigenous peoples because some of you may have heard the statistics, but about 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity resides in indigenous peoples' territories. So when we talk about things like access and benefit sharing, I'll even take it a little down a little more simpler for you. We talk about, in my community, reciprocity, right? Meaning that you don't only take, but you have to give back. And that's really what I think what you were trying to say in that. And we have just different ways of expressing that. But I think, if we come down to these basic ideals of reciprocity and respect, for us as Taino people, that's the building block of our relationships, whether they're diplomatic or otherwise. And again, that could be with humans or with other beings that we share the world with. So allyship, we're going to hear a little bit more about that. I don't want to talk about too much because I could keep going on and on, but I really want to introduce the speakers. But in my mind, just thinking about things like Nagoya Protocol, the issue of reciprocity or access and benefit sharing, and all of these things could come up. One other thing that I'd love to hear a little bit about when our speakers come up is also about equity, legal equity, and social justice in this discussion. Because I remember back in the early 90s when some of our folks who are not part of federally recognized tribes in the U.S. Scheme engaged with sacred medicines like peyote and others. We're prosecuted for that. And I remember bringing that up at the United Nations in one of the human rights forums about that very issue. But meanwhile, others can come into our communities, take that knowledge, and then patent, and then make money from that. And again, our folks are left out. We can be criminalized, and we don't have anything coming back to our community.